Good evening, Mr. Vice-Chancellor. Good evening, Dr. Price, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Hugh Koda. I'm doing this so that he can pay attention, right? So, Professor Hugh Koda, welcome. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special evening where we recognize academic staff whose distinguished work deserves special recognition. It's a special evening, in my view, not an evening of speeches, but an evening of, in a way, saying welcome to new fellows, but also saying thank you for the work you do, because it's the work that you do that give us a good name. It's the work that you do that make people look at us. It's the work that you do that makes the world say we are number one in Africa. And so, thank you for coming, and thank you for the work you do. There's a good reason we also invited the new fellows and the young researchers with their partners, because in your journey, in your career, you don't travel alone. You travel with people who support you in many, many ways. And when you achieve things such as these, it's important that we invite them and say thank you to them as well, or make them feel that they are part of the achievement. So welcome to the partners as well, who are here to celebrate with us. Let me introduce myself. I'm new here. I think I'm just a little around 500 days here. My name is Mamu Kheti Pageng. Don't worry, we will not ask you to spell the name at the end of the ceremony. You don't have to know the spelling. My name is Mamu Kheti Pageng. It's a Setswana name. Actually, Mamu Kheti is a very traditional name. It's got a praise poem to it. It essentially means the chosen one, just in case you forget. Yes, it's true. I'm not joking. That's what it means, right? I'm a professor of mathematics education. I feel like explaining that part, given the current controversy and so on, but I'm not going to go there. I ask you please to bear with me. That's all I'm going to tell you tonight, that I'm professor of mathematics education. On an ordinary day, I serve as Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Internationalization here at UCT. And tonight I have the honor and privilege of being your program director. Well, when I grow up, I hope to be a stand-up comedian, and I might try a few things this evening. Please forgive me if they don't work with you. I'll make sure that I don't make jokes with you, and I don't promise that they'll happen. I thought I should be a little serious, but sometimes it doesn't happen even when I want it to. So, it's going to be a short evening tonight because it's a celebration, and we celebrate by sharing a meal. So the most important speech is a welcome address by the Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Max Price, and I'm going to invite him to come and welcome us. Max.
Thank you, Mama Kheti. And as Mama Kheti said, this is not an evening of speeches, it's an evening to celebrate and have dinner. But in fact, it is an evening of mini speeches, and mine will be a mini speech too, because as you know, part of our tradition is to invite the new fellows, some of the new researchers, to tell us a little bit about themselves, and we're going to do that between our courses. Right now, I just want to welcome you all and to say what a pleasure it is to have, firstly, such a great attendance. For the last couple of years, we've had our fellows dinner upstairs in the senior common room, but we couldn't fit us all in there tonight. And that's a sign not only of the growing size of the college, but also tonight of what is a bumper crop of new fellows being elected to the college. I'm not sure if we've ever had 11 elected in 1 year before, but the fact that we have this many, and those you're all in the college, many of you attended the meetings at which we considered the nominations, and you will know that these were not contested at all. These were almost unanimous. Every person, almost for every candidate, the question was asked, how come we didn't appoint them before? Where have they been hiding? They're so eminently appointable and electable to the college. And that's a sign to counter the sort of doomsday message we sometimes hear that the older generation of academics are about to retire and that there's no one behind them to take their place. And there's this bit of a panic. How are we going to reproduce academia if about 50% of our professors are over the age of 50? In fact, that's simply an arithmetic artifact. If you think about it, most people start their academic careers roughly getting properly into their academic careers around 30. So if they work if half of them are between 30 and 50, and roughly the other half, just under half, are 50 to 55 to 65, you would expect, and since there is clearly a progression, those under 50 aren't going to be professors yet, by and large, then inevitably it will be the case that half of the professors will be retiring in the next 10 to 15 years. But that isn't a sign that we should be worried about it. And the evidence is that we are electing new fellows who will be taking the place of those who retire. So it's a pleasure to have so many. I think another, I suspect first, is in the attendance tonight of some infants under 1 year old. I don't think we've had babies at our College of Fellows dinner. And that's also a sign of huge progress, not because the infants are young researchers, but because it's a sign of how the gender mix of the fellows has shifted, as well as the gender mix of the young researchers who are being elected. And when I started about 10 years ago, I think there were 5 women fellows altogether, very few women young research. Well, the young research project only came in about 6, 7 years ago, so that's new. And the fact that we have now a significant number, I haven't counted it, but my sense is that it's getting up to a third of fellows are women, is also a really good sign. And certainly many of the new fellows, most are women. It's again been, although this year, 2017, has been a good year in all respects. Since our last dinner, we had the trauma of the suspension of classes at the end of last year, and I want to say thank you again to all of the fellows, because the fact that we have been able to produce in 2016, if you aren't aware of it, last night we launched the 2016 research report, and so it's on the web. We don't do a printed copy anymore, and you should go on and look at it. But what that research report tells us is that we published more publications in 2016 than in any year previously. We had more citations in 2016 than in any year previously. We generated more research grant money. I don't know if we had more patents, but we had more spin-outs, launched more innovation companies, and we generated more money from intellectual property from the spin-outs, nearly a trebling of the previous amount than we had in the year before. So the core business, at least the research business of the university, has continued to do incredibly well, and that's thanks to all of you, to the fellows and your colleagues, the distinguished scientists, the researchers, your students, your PhD students and your postdoc fellows, and your teams, your ability to write research grants and mobilize resources in spite of the hard times that we face, both socially, politically, and of course financially in terms of the funding of research. We have now 41 A-rated scientists. Peter Dunsby, who's one of the fellows tonight, was the most recently appointed A-rated scientist. We have a number of world-leading discoveries that in the last year, and in this year, the Hatter Institute discovered the gene that identified the gene which is the major cause of sudden death in young people and athletes. The IDH3A, which is our genetics unit, human genetics unit, identified a novel gene that is responsible for retinitis pigmentosa, an important cause of blindness. The business school was selected globally to partner on research that looks at leveraging private investment for social good and social impact. The Center for Innovation, Learning and Teaching, SILT, produced its 10th MOOC, and the MOOCs we have rated, three of the 10, have rated in the top 50 MOOCs of all time, according to the global rankings of MOOCs. We've done, there have been many other, and too many to list here, achievements of our centers of excellence and of our partnerships with other institutions globally. As I said, it's not an evening for long speeches, so it's just to highlight the achievement and to say thank you to all of you. In terms of the structure of the evening, we're going to have starters now, After the starters, we'll introduce the new fellows, and then we'll have some of the short speeches, 5-minute speeches. We're going to have 6 this evening altogether, 3 before the main course, and then we will have 3 between the main course and the dessert. And as we've done in the past, you have green cards. Some of you have green cards, not the central table, because the central table is here with partners and we didn't think we should split you all up. But the 2 side tables have green cards, and between 2 of the courses, those with green cards will switch to the other table, so that you don't have to sit next to the person you started with the whole evening. If you're finding the conversation boring, you'll have someone else to talk to later on. And as we know, the college is an opportunity to get to know other people's work. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the starters and enjoy the evening.
I hope you enjoyed your starter. There's a future fellow right there. So I want to introduce the College of Fellows Young Researcher Awards for 2017. I'll call them by name and their departments, and they'll come to the stage and take a picture with Dr. Max Price. I won't be in the picture, what a pity. But Max will be there. I know. Okay. First, Dr. Alvaro de la Cruz Dombrez from the Department of Mathematics and Applied Maths, Faculty of Science. Forgive me if I'm doing damage to your department. No, it's you. You are... there's going to be people who are going to speak. I don't know if you're one of them, but there's going to be speeches. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. Dr. Ross Hofmeyer from the Department of Anesthesia, Faculty of Health Sciences. Max was thinking I should join them in the picture. I just think it's not fair. I can't do that. Max.
Just come behind and,
No, that's not right, Max. Dr. Juana Sanchez Ortega from the Department of Mathematics and Applied Mathematics, Faculty of Science. Congratulations. And Dr. Shannon Moreira from Humanities Education Development Unit in the Faculty of Humanities. We won't ask what you were talking about. And then Dr. Sudesh Sivarasu, Department of Human Biology, Faculty of Health Sciences. I think this is Sudesh's 5th award this year. Like this year he's just been collecting awards inside and outside the country. Congratulations, Sudesh. There's a 6th young fellow, Associate Professor Amit Mishra, Department of Electrical Engineering, and she gets this award in absentia. I'm going to invite the Vice-chancellor right now to come and present each awardee with the certificate for the new fellows.
Now, in the past, I've been able to, since we've normally only had 2 or 3 fellows elected, I have asked the fellows to come up, and I've read a pretty substantial citation, so that we really do the honors that we ought to do. But given that we have a surfeit of riches this event and that it would just take too long, we decided this time to publish the citations in the booklet on your table, and I hope you'll take that home and it'll be a souvenir. And I think it's a nice tradition actually to start, because it means people can take away with them something that is a souvenir of the evening and also a tribute to the fellows. And so I'm going to try to limit my introduction, or a few words about each fellow, to less than 90 seconds each, so that we can get through it. But I will ask the fellow to stand, just so that you all know who he or she is and have that introduction. And we're going to start with Professor Mike Lambert. So Mike, if you would just stand up so that people can see who you are, and while I say a few words about you. Professor Mike Lambert is a professor in the Division of Exercise Science and Sports Medicine, based at the Sports Science Institute of South Africa. His research focused on the biological adaptations and maladaptation that occur after exposure to regular exercise. The main message from his work was that adaptation to exercise is individualistic and needs to be carefully monitored to prevent any signs of distress. In response, he's developed an inexpensive and easy to administer test to monitor fitness and fatigue status of players in collaboration with the High Performance Center of the Sports Science Institute. In addition, since 2000, Professor Lambert is the editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Sports Medicine. So you know where to go, all you runners and people with knee problems and hip problems and ligament problems. That's where you go to get it fixed. Mike, thank you. Well done. Professor Peter Dunsby. Peter heads the Department of Mathematics and Applied Mathematics. His contribution to astronomy in South Africa and globally has been outstanding through his development and advocacy of the NASP program, that's the National Astronomy Development Program, in partnership with several other South African universities, and linked to the support for the SALT telescope. Professor Dunsby's impact on research in cosmology is recognized internationally. He has developed aspects of, and now I'm quoting this, don't ask me what it means. It says, developed aspects of the elegant 1+3 covariant perturbation method in cosmology, and this was the basis of perturbation methods widely used to analyze anisotropies of the cosmic microwave background radiation. There you have it. A cornerstone of present modern day cosmology. He's also progressively developed a specialist niche area in studying the nature of dark energy. And in particular, he's researching a class of alternative theories of gravity that potentially can provide an effective solution to the problem without the need for dark energy. So, well done, Peter. Congratulations on election to the fellowship. Professor Malcolm Collins heads the Department of Human Biology. His doctoral and postdoctoral work, he claimed to be one of the junior new researchers earlier when we were taking photographs, and he looks young, but he's not that young. His doctoral and postdoctoral work in extracellular matrix biology stimulated his current research focus in elucidating the molecular mechanisms causing common exercise-associated musculoskeletal soft tissue injuries. He has developed an international and national interdisciplinary network of research collaborators consisting of clinicians and scientists. His UCT-based research team has published seminal papers on the identification of genetic risk-associated factors for common tendon and ligament injuries and gained international recognition as the pioneers and authority in this area of research. He has supervised, or is currently supervising, several postdoctoral fellows and nearly 40 master's or doctoral students. So if you're planning to take up squash again at this ripe old age and you're worried about rupturing that Achilles tendon, he will do the test on your gene. Between them, they will do the test on your gene and tell you if you're at risk and how to avoid it and how to cure and how to treat it when you've done the damage. Congratulations. Professor Chumo Himonga. Schumer, is a customary law expert at the Department of Private Law. Her research centers on the law of persons and marriage, African customary law, legal pluralism, and women's and children's rights under customary law in Southern Africa. Professor Imonga's body of work demonstrates the operation of law in practice, debunks the enduring primacy of common law over customary law, and engages with the complex interplay of common law and customary law in people's lives. In her work, she illustrates the need and advocates the reform for both systems. Professor Imonga has been at the forefront of reconceptualizing customary law from its appropriation by colonial and apartheid authorities to its central role in the current South African legal order. Professor Imonga, it's really fantastic to elect you to the fellowship, especially in this your retiring year, I believe. So it's great to have you elected before. So although we elect fellows for life, and you become a life fellow after you retire, to the best of my knowledge, you can't be elected as a fellow after you've retired. So it's really good to do that while you're here. Get your next fellow to be elected is Professor Lucy Gilson. Lucy Gilson is the head of the Division of Health Policy and Systems at the School of Public Health and Family Medicine. Her research focuses on strengthening health systems with a particular focus on health equity. Professor Gilson helped develop this still young and applied interdisciplinary field of health policy and health systems research, with a particular focus on low and middle income countries. Her in-depth empirical work includes assessing health systems not only in South and Southern Africa, but also farther afield, such as in Sri Lanka and Tanzania, and she coordinates multi-country studies from a base at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She studies factors that favor or obstruct health policy implementation, governance, decentralization of health systems, district health systems, primary health care, as well as aspects of health economics, and in particular, the financing of health systems and the use of user fees to fund health systems. Beyond her research, Professor Gilson aims to stimulate and encourage younger researchers to be interested in health policy and systems research, and she has published a number of methodological papers, for example, on how to investigate power in policy implementation. Lucy and I should tell you, shared an office in the London School of Hygiene when we were both very junior researchers in the mid-1980s, so we go back a really long way, and we're in the Centre for Health Policy together at Wits, and she's come down to Cape Town just a year or so before me, so it's really fantastic to be able to host this event where you're elected to the fellowship as well. Professor Chris Reason. Professor Chris Reason is professor in the Department of Oceanography. His research focuses on the scales of climate variability over Southern Africa and its neighboring oceans, and the meteorology of severe weather events. With his research, he aims to better understand the complex nature of intraseasonal and intra-annual variability of the atmosphere and oceans in the Southern African region, particularly on timescales that impact local communities. His particular focus is on meso and synoptic events, such as extratropical cloud bands and tropical cyclones, and their rainfall impacts on local communities. Apart from his research, he's involved in a large number of international committees and serves on the South African Government Global Change Science Committee. Previously, he served as the editor of Geophysical Research Letters, which is the most prestigious journal in this field in the world, and is currently part of the editorial board of numerous other journals. Congratulations, Professor Reason. Welcome. Professor Bruce Hewitson. Also in the field of climate change, Bruce Hewitson is the South African National Research Chair on Climate Change at UCT and lectures in the Environmental and Geographical Sciences Department. His research interests focus on regional climate downscaling and includes seasonal forecasting, weather extremes, and regional climate processes, with the aim to understand climate change and natural variability. Professor Hewitson's approach of integrating research for society has earned him international recognition. He has been involved in developing new guidance materials based on emerging understandings that has to integrate four what are sometimes quite distinct fields, and it's the integration of these fields that enables them to translate to the application and real life interventions. And these four fields are physical climate research, impact of research, adaptation strategies, and then of course regional, translating large-scale climate change modeling to micro and regional modeling. So Bruce is one of our heroes in the global community of climate change experts. There's hardly a university I visit that doesn't say, isn't Bruce Hewitson, that's what they used to say about Chris Barnard when he used to travel in the past, isn't Bruce Hewitson from UCT? Yes, he's the one who developed the climate model for Africa when there was this big hole in the global climate equilibrium modeling. So it may be apocryphal, Bruce, I don't know, but we dine out on it and we're very proud to have you as our representative. Congratulations. Professor Graham Mainkies is the principal investigator at the Institute of Infectious Diseases and Molecular Medicine, and he has made important original scientific contributions in clinical research in patients with HIV infection. One major focus of his research concentrates on the treatment and prevention of the tuberculosis-associated immune reconstruction inflammatory syndrome, TB-IRIS as it's known. He was appointed a member of the World Health Organization's Guidelines Development Group in recognition of this research in the field of common severe HIV-associated opportunistic infections, and in particular, cryptococcal meningitis. His findings on adverse events related to antiretroviral therapy and related to TB treatment in South Africa have influenced national clinical guidelines. And last but not least, he has conducted research on understanding the delays in the diagnosis of tuberculosis in HIV-infected people and in evaluating novel strategies to improve TB diagnostic yield in hospitalized HIV-infected patients. These areas, I've had to gloss over them really quickly, each of which is a significant area in its own right and has really established UCT, the IDM, and the research we do in HIV and TB in the field, particularly the adverse reactions to drug therapy. Congratulations. Congratulations. I'm doing this in the order it's been given to me. And the next person, Crick Lund, is actually not present this evening, but I do want to say something still briefly about him. Professor Crick Lund is a pioneer in researching mental health care at the Department of Psychiatry and Mental Health. His scientific work has had a significant impact on the development of norms for mental health services and interventions that address particularly the cycle of poverty and mental illness. He's been invited by the World Health Organization to collaborate in developing international mental health policy and service delivery guidelines for low and middle income countries. As the principal investigator in a series of large programs, Crick Lund now leads public mental health research in 8 countries and is one of a handful of the most eminent leaders and researchers in global mental health. We're very proud to have Crick as one of our distinguished fellows. Professor Peter Ryan is here, I believe. Did I see Peter? Is he not? No. Okay. Peter Ryan is director of the Fitzpatrick Institute for African Ornithology, a center of excellence at the Department of Ornithology. His research interests focus on understanding the environmental issues that affect birds such as plastic pollution at sea, island restoration, and the impact of fisheries on seabirds, and the effects of infrastructure on land birds. Professor Ryan is a leading international expert on the ecology of seabirds, and particularly on the direct and indirect human aspects on seabird populations. He is president of BirdLife South Africa and an associate editor of the Antarctic Science and Bird Conservation International Journal. He's also, as you would expect in a field like this, published many books and popular articles that have inspired a generation of amateur birders and naturalists. Let's show our congratulations to Peter Ryan. And the last on my list, who I think is also not here, Karen Barnes. No. Karen is the principal investigator at the Division of Clinical Pharmacology in the Department of Medicine. She is also the founding director of the Collaborating Center for Optimizing Antimalarial Therapy. Her research focuses on the changes in malaria treatment policy and how these impact on antimalarial resistance and clinical development of much-needed novel antimalarials. She has made important and original scientific contributions that have informed international malaria treatment policies, and her research has contributed substantially to understanding antimalarial drug exposure among vulnerable target populations, particularly young children and women, and those with comorbid HIV infection. She has led the pharmacology module of the Worldwide Antimalarial Resistance Network, and is a leading figure in the study of antimalarial medicines and novel antimalarial medicines. Let's congratulate her too as the elected fellow. And now, before we have our main course, we're going to have three speakers, and we've decided this year, because we had, as you may know, in the past we've had one established senior fellow and one of the new fellows, but with so many new fellows, we decided that we would have 4 new fellows and 2 of the College of Fellow Researchers, and so we're going to have 6 altogether. And as we've done in the past, we've chosen a word. Prof. Pakeng chose the word, so the speakers have her to thank, or curse, as the case may be, for the choice. But I think it's a great word, because we try to find an idea or a concept which would really be approached very differently from different disciplines, and offers an opportunity to think about our disciplines and concepts differently. The word chosen is the word power, and the first speaker is a new fellow, is Professor Bruce Yurtsen from the Environmental and Geographical Sciences, and I am, because of the number of speakers, going to be very strict on the 5-minute time limit. So, Bruce.
Thank you. This is a really strange environment for me. I'll just start off commenting. I've had 2 people chastise me tonight for not wearing a tie. In my defense, I don't own a tie. And it is my power play with academia to exert my academic license to dress how I want. So, I didn't know how to get this into 5 minutes, because the word power is so entrenched in my research at the moment in many, many different ways. And it plays a really deep, complicating role in what I do. And I'll start off with a quote from my all-time favorite author, G.K. Chesterton, who, although he was a century ago, I think is still so relevant for today. And he once said, "If a rhinoceros was to enter this room now, there is no denying that he would have great power. But I should be the first to rise and assure him he had no authority whatsoever." So, to me, that captures the 2 dimensions of power that I have to deal with in my work all the time. The one is the raw power of the climate system. And we know the hurricanes, we know the extreme events, we know we are changing the global energy balance. And there's a raw power in there. That is the easy power, and I'm not going to talk about that one, because that is, well, it's easier anyway, let's put it that way. The realm of power relationships is the one that really, really gives me headaches. It is very difficult to deal with the conflicting power relationships as you engage with society around climate change. I've just spent 2 days in Addis wrestling with AU bureaucracy around exertion of different types of bureaucratic power, and came away extremely frustrated. So the difference between dealing with raw power of the climate system and dealing with the power of power relationships and power authorities is that the latter depends on everybody accepting the same authority. And if I did not accept the authority of the College of Fellows, you would have no power over me. But if I accept the authority, you've got power over me. And we have this conflicted set of value systems in the world at the moment where we're really getting this problem. And I work across disciplines very, very strongly. And I was running a session at an international conference just a few weeks ago. And I took all the climate scientists and I said, you make one group. And I took the people who were dealing with impacts and adaptation, a second group. A third group was around communication of climate science to society, the sort of professional communication realm. And the third was the decision makers. And we had in this meeting everybody from world-class atmospheric modelers all the way down to city management officials. So we had the full spectrum of people there. And I put out a scenario there and I said, we need to make a decision around this under climate change. Would the city officials please articulate their information needs and pass it up the chain so it ends up with the climate scientist? And at the same time, will the climate scientist articulate a robust, defensible message that you think is relevant to the scenario and pass it down the chain? There were two outcomes. The one is that the city official wrote a detailed description of incredible amount of information that they want, way overscoped and impossible to deliver on. And they just had not got the concept of what could be obtained from the climate science. The climate scientists were most amusing because they spent the entire session arguing with themselves. They could not come to a consensus. And it's not that there's no message behind it, it's that they were arguing because they were sensitive to the power they held over impacting society. And that a message that goes forward changes things. I've said things on this continent that has resulted in large amounts of money being expended in different areas, and it makes me very, very wary. We suspended our seasonal forecast earlier this year because we were worried that people were overusing or overinterpreting within, and we're going through a reframing of our seasonal forecast because of that. So I think there's some real issues there of the power that we carry when we talk into this. Information steers actions to serious societal consequence. Yet, how that information is interpreted is a function of how people perceive their context. Because power is conditional on authority. Authority comes from different sources. You could be authorized by a cultural perspective, a legal perspective, a moral perspective, and depending on that, you will engage with other communities differently. And that gives a lot of contestation. And to engage here requires speaking into what I call a third space. I need to step out of my comfort zone and stand in a middle space where somebody steps out of their comfort zone and joins me there. And we try and see the problem from each other's perspective. It doesn't mean we legitimize contested perspectives, but we try and understand contested perspectives. My core discipline, atmospheric science, has largely shied away from doing that. But we're slowly kicking and screaming, dragging them into that. And I think this is something that all academics should experience, stepping into that third space. And it's a very uncomfortable space to step into that. And to get into that, I've taken my research team over the last few years, and we now have in our research team a philosopher, a mathematician, a zoologist, a hydrologist, a number of different types of social scientists, all the way down even to a one-time astrophysicist. All of us trying to work together to try and understand a problem that cannot be contained within one discipline, and we need to move beyond that. But that gives us a unique power to influence. Because we have this integrated third space thinking, we can step into a situation and actually speak competently. But that scares us. It really, really scares us because people listen to us. And there's nothing worse than saying something emphatic and having somebody take action on that because the ball comes back into your court eventually. This is something we were never trained for as an academic. We were never trained to think about the ethics of our information and how we deal with it. I ask my honours students to do an essay each year. I ask them to articulate their worldview. This is in a course on climate variability, so they're somewhat surprised, but it's not for marks, but it's a requirement. And their response is dramatic. I've had one break down in tears because her worldview, she suddenly realized life was meaningless. And another person who wrote a 35-page essay for a 5-page essay. So we have a problem there, and I want to deal with the power, close with the, sorry? Okay, I'm 5 minutes. Exercising my authority here. I just want to put a challenge to you. Last week, I spoke to a third-year class as a guest lecturer, and I asked them, do you know what your daily water consumption is? 5 out of 55 could answer me. I asked, how many of you know what your daily target is? A third of the class knew what their daily target is. That is scary when we're facing day zero coming down the road. I won't ask you that because I think it might embarrass some people here. But I would ask you, what is the power of this university to change that sensitization in society? Because we can impact all the students, who can impact their families, who can impact the city. Will it work? I don't know. But I think we carry a moral authority to work in this crisis situation, all of us depending on our discipline. So.
You can see why Bruce is so widely known and recognized. He's such a great communicator. Thank you, Bruce. And now I'd like to ask Professor Himonga to come and make the second talk.
Oh, my glasses. Power, simply defined as possession of control, authority, or influence over others, is sweet. We all love it, and the only factor that varies is the degree of love for it. Some people are happy with just a little power to keep them relevant in their spheres of life, while others crave it as though it were the only thing to live for. And in so doing, they become despots or abusers. So, in my view, there's nothing wrong with power. Without it, society would be ungovernable, with chaos and anarchy as the end result. Often, the problem with power has to do with how it's acquired and exercised. The first time I encountered the word power in an academic setting was in my first year of studying law at the University of Zambia, 45 years ago. Sitting at the feet of Professor Nabweze, the then constitutionalist model, we soon learned of what appeared to be his favorite, if not best, saying, and it went, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Without full comprehension of how hideous this kind of power was, some of us saw this adage as an identity badge among learned friends. Those of you who are lawyers know what learned friends are. It's only people who have learned law. Learned friends, as some of us saw this adage as identity badge among learned friends. We proudly, as law students, identified ourselves as learned friends. Each time we were able to recite, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, please take note. This was not anything like having to spend sleepless nights, months, and years poring over books, ideas, and reams of paper so as to be identified with the College of Fellows of the University of Cape Town. Power. Power does not only tend to corrupt, it's also an infection that has permeated the whole world. We thought we were healthy, but even my area of research, that is customary law, has not been immune to this infection. Indeed, no one's field of research is immune. There is power in customary law. I struggle to find a place where the desire for control, authority, and influence over others is as sweet. If you don't believe me, then consider with me the classic example of men who seek to assume responsibility over women and children without taking actual responsibility and being accountable for the power that they exercise. What an ironic assumption of power. Adults have also sought to exercise this kind of power over children. In the midst of ever-changing political and socio-economic environment, exercise of this kind of power has not gone unnoticed. National, regional, and international bodies of scholarship have therefore been established to curb this kind of irresponsible behavior. But I dare say, many of these irresponsible and abusive uses of male power are linked to and are the product of political power relations between Africa and the West in colonial and apartheid contexts. Moreover, power is at the center of contestations in many areas of customary law, in traditional leadership, gender relations, and property ownership, to name just a few. Again, I dare say many of these contestations are linked to and are the product of political power relations between Africa and the West. These relations led to the creation, distortion, and marginalization of indigenous laws and institutions. As I speak now, millions of people on the African continent, especially those living in rural areas, continue to live under these distortions and to suffer their devastating impact. Due to lack of implementation, relevance, and legitimacy, the attempted legal reforms are threatened with failure and prove to be of little value, save for the paper they were written on. But wait a minute. The historical distortions and marginalizations of indigenous laws have continued their devastating impact upon the people living under these laws well into the era of post-colonial, post-apartheid African states as well. Power. As a result, a considerable part of my scholarship has been devoted to research of these aspects of power within the African legal systems. It's this body of scholarship, among others, that I humbly bring to the College of Fellows at the University of Cape Town. College of Fellows, I'm sure we can agree to identify each other as learned friends. There's power in this identification, but let's be mindful of how we use this power. Let's use our influence soberly to the benefit of future generations of scholars and to the benefit of humanity as a whole. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chuma, for you managed to squeeze in a whole body of your work into that 6.5 minutes. Well done. And our third speaker, before we eat, is Dr. Shannon Moreira, who is the College of Fellow Young Researcher Awardee from the Humanities Education Development Unit.
Thank you. I'm a social anthropologist who works in an education development unit in the humanities, and I think it's probably a bit dangerous to ask a social anthropologist to talk about power, because we could talk for a very long time. but I shall limit myself. My research is particularly concerned with the production of knowledge and its impact on the lived everyday experiences of people. So as such, a lot of what I do is concerned with power. Who has the power to make the knowledge? And we have a lot of people in this room who are in that position. Who has the power to use it? How knowledge moves, how it's accessed, and then by whom? What kind of knowledge is considered powerful knowledge, and what kind of knowledge is not seen as legitimate? My work on knowledge in the everyday has taken me into the field of human rights law and into the field of higher education pedagogy. Being an anthropologist, I like to tell stories. So I'd like to tell two quick stories from these two field sites to explain the way in which the concept of power has resonated in my work. The first is a big story on a grand national scale, and it concerns the writing into law of a new constitution in Zimbabwe. I have a whole chapter of my book devoted to this, and the story it tells is essentially one in which the Zimbabwean government spends a huge amount of time and money on a constitutional outreach project which aims to get the people's voice on what the constitution should entail, on what sorts of rights should be written into the constitution, and on what sorts of powers the presidency should have. But the process was a deeply flawed one, and aside from the internal issues of how it was brought into being, the constitution that comes out at the end of the day in 2013 looks a lot like the one that the ruling party wanted to push through right from the beginning, which greatly extends presidential powers, despite the fact that the people's voice has ostensibly been heard. When I ask a human rights lawyer what the whole process was about, why the time, why the money, why the effort, when the people's voice clearly wasn't particularly wanted or even needed, she replies, because you have to look as though democracy is happening, because then you can claim legitimacy. Money on cars and salaries and meetings is money well spent if you can then come out of it with the constitution you want, but you can call it a constitution based on the people, that has rights within it that are laid down by the people themselves. So that's power then on a very grand scale, drawing on international discourses of democracy and voice to legitimize distilling power much more strongly into the hands of a single leader. And I think in some ways we're facing a few of those issues in South Africa today. But power can be also enacted on a much smaller scale, on the everyday scale, including here at UCT. So the research I've conducted more recently with the Humanities Education Development Unit, through that the university has become a field site for me, and that process has been a very eye-opening one. So knowledge itself, and then the teaching of that knowledge, is of course a deeply power-laden process. We all know that, we all teach. What materials are taught, who teaches them, who's in the classroom to be taught, all of those things stem from present and from historical power relations. UCT has recently seen some very vehement debates over exactly those issues. Some of the research I've recently been doing has been into the effects of multilingualism on learning. And it's been astonishing to me what can be done to change traditional power relationships in classrooms simply by changing the language dynamic. In one of the classes I teach, I ask my first year students to submit glossaries of key concepts, that are very laden with meaning, in their mother tongue and in English, if they wish. And one of the terms we define is power. So I thought it would be interesting to look at those definitions. One student defined power in English as, power is the ability to control what happens. Power gives people to achieve things that normally would not be possible. Her Zulu definition was shorter, but no less effective. She defined power as amandla. This is a word that carries huge historical valence in South Africa. To define power as amandla allows for locally relevant history to come into the classroom and gives us as teachers a much better of understanding what the student meant in her English definition. Power gives people to achieve things that normally would not be possible. It becomes much more meaningful when read in light of South Africa's history and the history of the term amandla. I don't think it's possible to be a contemporary anthropologist without engaging with ideas of power, both in terms of the discipline's history and where we are at present, from national politics to classroom dynamics. I could go on, but I think I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Shannon. So I hope that will stimulate conversation at the table, and we're now going to have the main course. Enjoy the meal. But it's not a quality that the fellows have ever distinguished themselves at, and that is moving the seats. So if you have a green card, then you are probably sitting next to someone who does not have such a card. And the idea is that people in alternate seats will switch around. And I'm not quite sure how this table seems to have lost so many people, but it doesn't matter already. So if you have a green card at this table, will you please get up and move to almost the same position you would have been in, but at that table, and vice versa. People from that table, take your green card. You don't have to take your green. Take your glass of wine, take your serviette, and your name tag if you wish, and switch over, and you should find an empty seat in the parallel place. At the central table, you don't have to move, right? If you happen to have a green card at the moment, you don't have to move. Okay, now we all found our seats. Not you, Anton. And now I'd like to ask 4 people from the central table, volunteers, 4 volunteers from the central table to go to this table, because this table is now short. And if you would just, no, don't worry, you guys stay where you are, you're perfect. 4 from the central table to move to this table so that we can. Good. And so now, can I have your attention, please? Okay, you've got 3 minutes to introduce yourself to your new people, and then we'll start again. But for now, we're going to continue with our talks on power. And it's my pleasure then to invite Professor Mike Lambert from the Department of Human Biology to come and speak to us. Mike.
Okay. All right. Good evening, Vice-Chancellor, Deputy Vice-Chancellors, and esteemed colleagues. When I received the invitation to say a few words, I read the instructions, which were that I have 5 minutes in which I have to speak succinctly, learnedly, wittingly on the word power. So that was my basis. My first reaction was, thank goodness. Thank goodness that I'm not a political scientist, because then I'd have to talk about the power of corruption, the dynamics of power, and these are topics I don't really enjoy very much. Or that I was a statistician, because then I'd have to talk about sampling power and power statistics, also a very difficult topic for a diverse audience. I'm even more grateful that I'm not an electrical engineer, because then I'd have to talk about the problems of keeping power on in the country and how Eskom is messing this up. So I'd then get back into the cycle of how power corrupts. So I'm an exercise scientist, and we use power in a range of activities within our discipline. Power is used as a measurement of how well muscle functions. We use power according to a pure definition. So power is calculated as work divided by time. And in this definition, work is equal to force times distance, and force is equal to mass times acceleration. So we have a number of clearly defined variables that we can measure and that can contribute to the manifestation of power. Now, power is generated by the neuromuscular system, and this involves an interaction between the nervous system and muscles. The rate of power production varies according to many different conditions. For example, power increases as a child grows, and around puberty and just after puberty, there's a period of rapid growth during which muscle power increases at a much faster rate. Prepubescent girls have similar muscle power compared to similarly aged boys. However, this characteristic is lost as once they go through puberty. Now, athletes train to develop power because superior power is usually associated with superior athletic performance. And athletes take drugs to improve their muscle power. But our interest in muscle power is not only relevant for athletic performance. For example, various illnesses are associated with a decline in muscle power. And the measurement of muscle power is often used as a marker to determine how well a patient is responding to the treatment or not. As we get older, a natural consequence of aging is a loss of muscle power. Suffice to say, muscle power goes a full cycle, starting at very low levels in infants, peaking in our mid-20s, and then getting near that of infants just before we die. Muscle power can be measured in many different ways. We have fancy, expensive equipment in the laboratory which measures various aspects of muscle power. For example, we can measure the rate of force development or the development of resistance to fatigue. We can also measure muscle power in the field where we don't need any fancy equipment. A PhD student from our unit went around the country a few years ago and measured the muscle power of about 10,000 school children. And her PhD thesis was involved in interpreting various aspects of muscle power and aging and socioeconomic status. And it was very clear that socioeconomic status also impacts on the development of muscle power. So to summarize, muscle power is the bread and butter of exercise scientists. Research involving muscle power has contributed to the health of the nation, and research into high-performance sport has also contributed to superior performances of our national teams. Both these aspects ignite the power of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Second speaker is Professor Lucy Gilson, School of Public Health and Family Medicine.
First exercise of power. So power is a phenomena that we're all familiar with and comfortable with, and my experience of power started as a child. I'm the youngest daughter of four girls, and in our household the exercise of power was very clear from an early age. I was powerless, that's what I felt. My sisters were all incredibly powerful. However, they had a different understanding of the same experience, and there's a story in the family that whenever it was time to do the washing up after dinner, my sisters would say, "Come on, Lou, let's go and do the washing up," and I would be nowhere to be seen. I was exercising my power to resist by not being available to get involved in the washing up. And that sort of everyday practice of power is at the heart of the research that I've been doing in the last few years. I've been looking at decision-making practices within the health system, and I've been particularly interested in how decisions are made and power is exercised by those at the front line of service delivery, by the frontline providers, healthcare workers, patients, citizens, and mid-level managers. And of course, the power of those higher up the system matters, but the power of those who actually every day deliver healthcare and make healthcare be delivered. That's a really important exercise of power that we need to understand and engage with. And although they are often thought to be powerless, they actually have lots of power in making things work for good as well as sometimes for less good. And understanding the sort of leadership that those groups exercise within every health system has been really a central part of the work that I've done since I've been here at UCT. Mid-level health managers play critical roles in the health system. They exercise power in ways that can bring teams together to ensure good quality care. They can also exercise power in ways that generate resistance, like mine as a child, and even opposition. And the way they exercise power is not always very visible. They may do it by the way they role model, through their behavior, through what they demonstrate to others about how to behave to people and to each other. They can also do it through the way they use words, the symbols that they express through their words, what matters and what is valued, and how that is demonstrated through their words. And they also can exercise power by giving it away, by inviting others into the decision-making process, and by enabling others to participate in that decision-making so that it is a shared and collective decision-making. And that collective practice of power is really a very potent and important practice of power with any health system. Now, in thinking about power, I've also over the years thought quite a lot about trust, because they are two sides of the same coin. Power can be exercised in ways that undermines trust in relationships, and it can be exercised in ways that generates trust. And trust is often the legitimate foundation for the exercise of power. So we have to understand power and trust together in really understanding what makes a health system tick and what sometimes challenges its ticking. Power and trust also remind us that every health system is comprised of relationships amongst people, amongst organizations, amongst groups. And it is those relationships that have to be navigated when one is seeking to bring change in health systems, when one is seeking to improve functioning, improve performance, improve quality of care. The quality of the relationships within the health system is really important, and the experience of power and trust can not only aid or hinder change, but it also influences patients' individual experiences of care, and it influences how society more generally views the health system that is embedded within it. So is it a safety net in times of crisis, or is it a place of betrayal and injustice? So understanding power as a phenomenon within health systems is critical in thinking about how they can be managed, developed, and changed to deliver greater value for society. And health systems are part of our society, so they should be delivering that value. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I was thinking as you were talking that when I saw the topic that Geti had chosen, I thought I'd really like to talk at this fellows' dinner on power. But I'm not a fellow, and I'm not going to abuse my position to speak on the topic, so I shall just pass over that and invite our last speaker, Dr. Sudesh Sivarasu, to speak to us.
Respected Vice-chancellor, DVCs, and colleagues, College of Fellows, and my colleague, Young Research Award winners. Thank you for this opportunity. So, you might see a couple of unusual things here. First, I don't have a notes, all the other speakers had. So it shows how much prepared I am for this talk. And second, you will see me looking at the wall every now and then. Being an academic, I always use the PowerPoint, so I might be looking there with the thought that there is a PowerPoint. But today it isn't, so I'll have to speak out of my mind. Right, power. Shakti, that's what power is called in my language, Tamil. So I was just thinking a lot about this word, and I was thinking, why did they choose the word power? Because it's kind of, I don't know, it can be politically very wrong, or it comes from it depends on your perspectives how you look at the word power. So I was kind of curiously looking at this word. So what I did, I went back to people whom I trust the most, my family, and I asked them, see, I've been asked to talk on the word power. What do you think I should be speaking about? So I went to my beloved wife, who's a linguist, and I asked her, what is power? She said, power is language. Language is power. Everything in the world is language. And without language, there is no power. I said, okay. Then every profession would say the same. So then I called up my mom, and I asked her, Mom, my mother is a teacher, so I asked her, what is power? She said, she was a headmistress, so she said, education is power. Everything is education. Without education, there's nothing. So education is power. So I was kind of getting confused. And I also saw a line in the introductory email, it must be related to your field. So the closest member in my field, in my family, is my father, who's a mechanical engineer, but a steam engine driver. So I went to him and I asked him, what is power? He said, power is raw power. Don't you know watts? Don't you know joules? That's power. So I was, how do I convince myself to talk about a topic which each one perceives differently? So I went back to think about, in my discipline, what is power? The name biomedical engineering, Prof. Kit Wong can address to it, is a collaborative field. So I was thinking, so it is not engineering, it's not medical sciences, it's biomedical engineering. So maybe in my field, power is collaboration, working with the clinicians, working with healthcare service providers. So I was thinking, okay, let me go and talk about it. But then something interesting struck my mind while I was doing my due diligence about it, and it goes back about like 25 years back, or even 30 years back. We were traveling in a train from a place called Bangalore in India to a place called Chennai in India. So we were traveling by train. The advantage of being a son of a father who works for railways, you get free passes to travel in train. So we were traveling in the train, and there was this gentleman who was sitting next to us, and he came to me because, when I was young, I used to attract a lot of attention because I used to be this round fellow. That's how they used to call me, round fellow, short and round fellow. So he came to me and he asked me, hey, round fellow, so in my own language, what do you want to become when you grow old? I said, without any hesitation, the train was actually going to Delhi. Delhi is the capital, New Delhi is the capital of India. So I said to him, I want to become the president of this country. So he was like, for a moment, he didn't think anything about it. He was just shocked. And after that, he called every single other people in that compartment, and he was saying, this round fellow wants to become the president of this country. Do you even understand what president is? At that moment, I didn't have any understanding what presidency is all about. If the same question is asked now, I would say definitely no. But at a very young age, I presumed that presidency is power. That is to boss over people, to say that everybody will work at your command. But just taking a stance back, if I want to put out a question to you here. If there is one power that is given to you, what would you use it for? It can be anything. It can be, you could just choose anything. And so for me, it went a little philosophical. So I was just thinking, if that power is given to me, what would I do? I tend to seem to like what my mother said. It's all about education. It can be used in almost every single field. It can be used in law, it can be used in biomedical engineering, it can be used in medicine, and I just want to revert to a famous quote from Dr. Ambedkar. He says that if you want to change the society, educate the people. That's the power of education. Nothing else can change what education can do. Education can bring up financial levels of people. Education can take up, increase your moral levels, whatnot. So but again, the problem is we end up searching power outside. The real power doesn't lie outside; it lies inside. And I want to quote Tirukkural. It's a saying. It's a very popular thing in my language. So it says, "Karka kasadara kartavai katrapin nirka adarkataga." So whatever you learn, you stand by it. So keep learning. And for me, power is education. So don't search for power outside. The power is inside you, and the power comes from the ultimate source, the Lord Almighty. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sudesh. We've been treated this evening, and I hope that you will perhaps think in your own disciplines and what power is. One of the issues that's taxing me a lot, and I wondered if it would come up, and it perhaps came up in Sudesh's last comment, is the extent to which we have free will. And of course, the idea of power, to the extent that it's about human relations, depends very significantly on the idea of having free will. And it seems to me that as neurobiology and neuropsychology develops, the evidence in support of free will is diminishing drastically. And where power really resides, therefore, becoming far more obtuse and opaque, perhaps, and much more complicated to deal with. I'll leave that thought with you as you tuck into your desserts and enjoy coffee and a social evening. Thank you all very much for coming, and let's just give all our speakers and new fellows one more round of applause. And I want to thank Prof. Pakeng, the program director, and the team that you see sitting on the comfortable chairs there. We're on the hard chairs, but the people in the comfortable chairs there from Communications and Marketing Department who've put the evening together and made it so successful. Thank you very much.
And I was once giving a talk to a very large group of school teachers who by and large were fairly antagonistic towards evolution. And as part of it, I turned it into a little workshop, and I said, now I'd like you to please tell me how you think evolutionary biology should be taught. And I was expecting a considerable amount of eloquence and scientific argument and so on. But a little Muslim lady leapt to her feet. She could not be contained, and she stuck up her hand and waved it around. And she just said, with respect. And you know, it was such a powerful statement, because in a sense it encapsulates how I believe interactions need to take place in our broader society. And I use that little example deliberately because in my experiences of Max, that epitomizes exactly what the man is about. I haven't always agreed with Max's policies, and I'm sure he'd be kind of disappointed. Now he's waving his 5-minute one. As I say, I'm sure he would be disappointed if I had agreed with all of them. But what I have enormously appreciated is the personal respect with which he interacts with individual people. I'm emphasizing those words because I firmly believe it's at the level of interactions with individual people that changes take place. I would vouch that Max probably has had the toughest operation as a Vice-chancellor in the many years that I have been here at the university. It has been an extremely tough time. But I want to repeat what he said himself early on, how thrilled he was when he looked around this audience to see the transformation and the change that has taken place. John Parkington and I were just sitting and saying, when we were elected fellows, I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but when we were elected fellows, there was one female and no non-white fellows amongst that group. And I share the thrill. And Max himself has been a major part of that transformation. And I really think that tonight we owe him a great debt in many, many respects. I have one little, maybe two personal confessions. One is that when I was very young, I was a student in Smuts Hall. And it hasn't changed very much, but I noticed that the spoons have changed. Because in our day, if anything exceptional happened to somebody, it was tradition that you beat on the tables as loudly as possible with the spoons. So the spoons were all flat as knives. This is the new generation. But there is another confession I have, and that is that almost exactly 50 years ago, I fell deeply in love with the lady who became my wife. And at that stage, I was extremely poor. I couldn't afford any luxurious gifts for her. I was in the category of youngsters who would go to the local restaurant and wait till somebody had left their food plate with remnants on it and quickly move in and eat the remnants, quite literally. But as part of my practices, the passion of my life, I learned, had a deep love for roses, and I just couldn't afford roses. But I discovered that the Vice-chancellor's house had a magnificent rose garden. And so I used to sneak in there deep at night, initially through the gates, and then they started locking the gates, so over the gates after that. I was never greedy, it was one rose at a time. Years later, one of the vice-chancellors said to me, I used to have a magnificent bush of red roses here, but it never bears flowers anymore. So as a final act of retribution and restoration, Max, I must both thank you and present back to you at least one of those roses. Spoons on the table.